Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of Wealth Simplified. I am your host, Tony Raymond, owner and wealth advisor at Raymond Financial. And on today's episode, I wanted to talk about some of the most common investments that are out there that we choose to invest in. So that being stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. I'm going to dive into each of them just to give you a very basic idea of what they are and how they function. So first up, we'll dive right into stocks. I pick stocks first because they're the most exciting. Most people like stocks. They can be trendy, sometimes so trendy that it takes away from why you should actually own them in the first place. But we won't cover that today. We'll just focus on what a stock is and why you should own it. So a stock, much like we count our currency in dollars, you count stock in shares. So you can own a share of a company. So I'll give you an example. I find the easiest way is to just give examples. So let's take a fake company, ABC Company, and let's say there is 100 shares of stock for ABC Company. Well, that means that each one share is worth 1% of the company. So if you own 20 shares, you effectively own 20% of that company. So let's say ABC Company is worth $100,000. Then one share of stock, 1%, is going to be $1,000. If you own 20 shares of that stock, it's worth $20,000. In an ideal world, all the value of the stocks will add up to be what the company is worth. So there's 100 stocks, company's worth 100,000, each one of them is worth $1,000. So why you should own a stock is that you believe in that company. Let's take ABC Company, let's take the 20 shares that you own of the 100. Let's say ABC Company is worth $100,000. Well, they put in a lot of time, a lot of effort, they gain some more customers, and they double in size next year. Now ABC Company is worth 200,000. Well, if you still owned that 20 shares, instead of each one of them being worth 1,000, so $20,000, now each one of them is worth 2,000 or $40,000. So your investment went from $20,000 to $40,000 just because ABC Company did better as a company. So that's kind of the basics of how a stock works. We don't want to get too much into it for the purpose of this episode, but just wanted to give you the basics. So next is a bond. And how bonds work is essentially the company is using you as a bank. You're loaning money to a company. So let's use ABC Company, for example. We talked about them doubling in revenue over a year. Well, how do you do that? You probably invest some money in staff, you invest some money in marketing, you invest some money in your products and your efficiencies and making you better. Well, where does that money come from? Sometimes companies will issue what's called a bond. So this means you're loaning money to the company. Let's say for this example, ABC Company put out a bunch of $10,000 bonds. So we give ABC Company $10,000 of our money, and what we get in return is one, a promise to pay that $10,000 back, and two, an interest rate that they're going to pay us until they pay it back. So let's say you loan them $10,000 for 10 years at 4%. Let's say that's the term of the bond. So what that means is you give them $10,000, they give you $400 a year for each of the next 10 years, and then at the end of the 10 years, they give you your $10,000 back. So you turned your 10,000 into 14,000 just based on ABC's ability to pay that bond back. So again, very simple example of what a bond is. There's a bunch of different ways that it can work, but that just gives you the basics on how it functions. So lastly, I wanted to cover mutual funds as they are probably the most popular paper asset that people own. If you have a 401k, you've probably invested in mutual funds inside of that account. So the way that a mutual fund functions, it can be made up of stocks, bonds, or other investments, but we'll focus on a stock mutual fund because it's kind of the easiest to explain. So what a mutual fund does is instead of buying individual stocks like we talked about owning shares of ABC Company, a mutual fund will buy a bunch of shares of a bunch of different companies. So let's say, for example, there's ABC Company and then their competitors, XYZ Corp and 123 Industry and Big Technology. So let's say those four kind of dominate that industry space. Well, the mutual fund can own shares of all of those companies and then package them as one thing for you to buy. So we talked about ABC Company stock being worth $1,000 for each share. Well, what if you only have $400 to invest? You can't buy one share of ABC Company. So a mutual fund could say, you can buy $400 of our mutual fund, which is all four of the companies that I already mentioned. So it'd be 25% of each of those companies for your $400, or $100 in each of those companies. So why is that beneficial instead of just owning the stock? Well, one, I mentioned you might not be able to buy the stock, and mutual funds you can buy monthly. You can do $100 a month and just put it in and keep adding up, and you own all the underlying companies. On the downside, let's look at kind of a worst case scenario. Let's say somebody decided to take, their money and invest it in the big technology competitor that I was talking about in the space. Well, what happens if ABC Company, XYZ Corp, and 123 Industry dominate the space so much that big technology is not worth anything anymore? They go out of business. Well, if you own shares of stock in big technology, now your money is not worth anything. No matter how much you invested, it's worth $0 now because big technology isn't a company anymore. In a mutual fund, if big technology only represents 25% of it in this case, your money will go down by 25%. So effectively, your $400 turns into $300 instead of losing everything that you put into it. So it helps you diversify your risk by owning a bunch of different companies, but it also helps you simplify it by only having one thing that you need to buy and getting access to a bunch of those different companies. So that's kind of the basics of how stock works, bond works, mutual fund works. There's obviously more complexities to each of them, but that's just the basic idea, which I think helps to understand as we learn about them going forward. I'm happy to go more in depth on them in future episodes. Just let me know if that's something you'd like to see. As always, feel free to send me an email to Tony, Tony, at Raymond, that's REMUND, financial.com, and I'll throw that up on the screen for you at the end. And also feel free to subscribe to the channel. You can just click the subscribe button below for free so you don't miss future episodes. So I look forward to hearing other topics that you guys would like to see discussed, and I will see you next episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a good week.